is a young writer and journalist based in Johannesburg. In this episode of Speaking from the Heart, this incredible creative opens up about family, work, politics, trauma, and life.
My name is Pearl Wishamani, and I was born in Lebachum in Limpopo. The history behind my name is a story my mother loves to tell me. I've heard it about 1,000 times. So she says when she was pregnant with me, she had a dream where an old woman she did not know, but who had a green duck on, which she took to mean it was like an ancestor from her father's side of the family because green is their color. But an old woman with a green duck on told her that you're going to have a girl and she's going to be born between these dates. And if she's born after this date, she will not live. So I was born like just a few hours before midnight, before the deadline of when I would not make it. And she told my mother what to name me, which was Lebogang, which means, to be thankful, to be grateful. And then I think she just really liked the name Pearl. So my first name, funnily enough, is Pearl. And my middle name, Lebogang, which I was given by, I suppose, the ancestors. And that is the story behind my name. I was raised by mostly my mother. My mother was always around. So my dad, he worked a lot and he was away a lot. So there was a period where he wasn't really around, but my mom was always there. So it was always just like, like I say, the small family unit was my mom. She was there, ride or die, my whole life. Like, that's who I've had. I wasn't raised by my grandparents or anything. It was always my mother. I have two older brothers, Thando and they used to roast me a lot when I was growing up. I think it was really dope having two older brothers because, as a girl, I wanted to do everything that they did. I wanted to dress the way that they did, wherever they hung out, when they were into rap and they had rap crews. I wanted to do that too. I had a rap name, whatever it was that they did, I really tried to follow it. And they just roast me all the time, which helped me to develop a thick skin, but also made me a lot more confident. So, Thokozani was just the hip hop head. He liked basketball. He was the quieter one, but really funny. And then Thabo was the more serious one. He's the one closer to me in age, but we still had a 6-year age gap. So my brothers are 9 and 6 years older than me. And when you're a kid, that's a massive age gap. So they never wanted to hang out with me. I wanted to hang out with them. I was just never cool enough, but they were always very, very protective. And the great thing about having brothers, my brother specifically, is that it always made me feel like I could do anything. They just always made me feel like you got this, nobody's better than you, don't be intimidated, don't shrink. And that's part of the reason I think I have the personality that I do and probably the career that I do because of the way that I grew up. My family was I don't want to say stereotypical, but it was in a way where it was, I think, a stereotypical patriarchal family household where the man's in charge, and my mom didn't work. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom. So my life was, mom bakes, cooks, cleans. That's what moms do. And then dad goes to work and what he says goes. And I definitely grew up in that environment. But there was a really, part of the reason I'm a feminist, right, in so many different ways. And part of the reason I'm like that is because of my father. And it was two things. It was both rebelling against him, but it was also his influence. Because he would always encourage me to, I must work, I must not let a man control me, I must do whatever I want, I'm in charge of my own destiny. The irony, right? And then I remember when Trump became president, there was a really interesting feature that one of the American newspapers did about how men like Trump will raise daughters, but they'll never marry those women like their daughters. And it made sense to me finally in terms of at least how I had grown up, where, in one way, my dad was quite patriarchal towards his wife and all the other women in his life, except for me. And he had actively told me not to be that woman. And I think it was always really confusing when I was starting to think about it when I was older, about how on earth can the same person who is benefiting from patriarchy and keeping patriarchy firmly, entrenched in his life, how can he also then actively and consciously raise a feminist daughter and an empowered daughter? And then it just made sense where it's actually quite a thing where men do that sometimes, where you want your wife to be one way, but you don't want your daughter to be like your wife. And so for me, so I grew up in a very patriarchal environment, and that's how I turned out. I think the way that I turned out, completely hate the patriarchy, obviously. The values that were instilled in me were to always be true to myself. I mean, I know that's such a cliche, but it's made such a huge difference to my life, to the way that I approach everything, from my friendships to my career to my relationships, like everything, and the way that I carry myself, right? Like, it was always, don't live for other people. Don't live for other people's approval, because you'll never get it. Like, my parents would always tell me that. That was drilled into me. Don't be like a people pleaser, because you'll never please all of the people all of the time. And I learned this very, very early on growing up. So that was a very important value. And I just think my parents, man, they really made me feel like I could do anything, no, whether we had money or not, despite the fact that they didn't have many opportunities growing up, they always were just like very supportive. So when I said I wanted to study journalism, we didn't have money, but they made a plan, and they were like, okay, they were super supportive. The only dream that was ever thwarted was when I actually wanted to be a fine artist. I wanted to study art, and then my dad said, you'll be poor forever, and I thought, that sounds terrible. So I went to journalism. I have very vague memories about my very early education, but I remember grade 1. We used to wear white dresses, bruh. Like, who puts a 6-year-old in a white dress? Like, that just makes no sense, And then, you come home and you're super dirty and you get into trouble. Like, I think about that a lot. Why were they making us wear white dresses? Like, I'm 8. Obviously, I'm going to want to climb things, and this whole drilling. I think it was conditioning us to be ladies. Even when you're 8, you can't do things that other kids do, or should do. You can't really climb trees. You're not allowed to do that. You have to be a little lady. I remember that. I remember, when I started school, it was when when the country was still changing. So there was still a couple of white kids, but then very quickly they just vanished. And I remember one of my first friends was this white kid, and I remember saying hi to her mom, and her mom just gave me the dirtiest look. And I was like a kid, bruh, And then I told my mom about it, and my mom was like, yes, because you were black, because you're black. And I was just like, what does that even mean? I mean, I think it made me feel really insecure. All kids just want to be accepted. All kids just want to be what's right. In a way, right? We just seek approval constantly when you're a child. That's, I think, what it's all about. And then some people don't outgrow it. But I think I really sought approval, and I really liked white things. I liked the Spice Girls and all these things that, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I liked all the white singers, and I didn't really like, my cousin, for instance, she went to a private school. I didn't. I went to a public school. And my cousin liked Boys to Men, which I thought was so weird, because I was like, why would you like that? It's so black, and I'm 10 years old at that time, and I'd much rather listen to all the things that all the white kids like, the Spice Girls, whatever else. And then, you move to the suburbs, you live in the suburbs, and you live in complexes, and you also make white friends, and then you also realize your parents don't like you because of the color of your skin. And my mom would always be like, yes, it is because you're black. And it just made me feel really awkward, I think. As a kid, I just wanted approval, man. And then I got over it, eventually.
Coming up next, Pearl speaks on generational apartheid trauma.
So there's certain things that'll traumatize us. So even though we might not have lived through apartheid firsthand, that trauma is there. And it's not just because of the stories we've been told, but because it actually did change people's DNA and was passed down, and we're born with this trauma. Our first crush was Johnny Depp. I didn't know, I didn't have enough friends for there to be real human beings I had crushes on. Yeah, I don't know, I didn't really have many crushes. I really hated boys growing up, so I didn't have crushes. Obviously, I crushed on all my brother's friends, all of them. But yeah, and then my first love was my first boyfriend, I guess. Love is, man, it's a, and I'm going to talk about not just romantic love, right, but just love in general. I think love is creating a safe space for somebody, or being in a safe space where you are still challenging and pushing that person to either grow or to do better, but you're also comforting them at the same time, if that makes sense. I think it's where people can be themselves, but also at the same time, if somebody knows that you can be better, or you should be better, or you should do better, they'll tell you. So it's a space of honesty. It's a space of appreciation, although we don't always show it I think we take a lot of the people in our lives for granted, especially our friends. We take our friends for granted. But that's what love is to me. It's honesty and it's safety, and it can be uncomfortable, but it's important. I think I've experienced love, and I experience it every day, from my partner to, or my husband, I guess, to my family, to my friends. I think about, there's a specific friend I'm actually thinking about, who to me I think has shown me the greatest love I've ever been shown in my life, where people are honest and forgiving, and they forgive you even if you can't forgive yourself. And I'm not talking about, for instance, in situations where you hurt other people, but where you hurt yourself, or you feel guilty about your actions towards yourself and the way that you treat you, but somebody else forgives you for it on your behalf, right? Where they sometimes can see that you are not living a life you should be living, or that you are not in the space you should be in, but they are still there for you and they want you to do better, but they love you either way. And they're generous and gracious. There was always love at home. I'm really lucky, I think, about that. I always had a safe space, which was always my mom. And the family environment, it changed all the time depending on our circumstances. So, sometimes it was like really cool and fun and everybody got along, and then sometimes it was just like not so fun. But I always felt safe at home. I never felt like I couldn't go home. I never felt like I need to be outside and like avoided going home. I liked being at home. And it was just, I was, in hindsight, I was actually a very lucky kid. Like, it was just, it was a constant. So my childhood wasn't necessarily stable, but there was that constant family unit that I was really lucky to have and completely took for granted at the time, obviously. And now I realize I was hella lucky. Mental health. I became very aware of, I think, my mental health and my negative mental health when I was a teenager. It could have been also brought about by the music that I liked, or it could have been brought about by the music that I liked, or, the shows that I watched. I think I gravitated towards certain things because I was in a certain kind of mental space. But I only got treatment, or rather, it only really got worse, really, really bad. As a teenager, I thought about killing myself a lot. But then you get into a really high pressure environment like journalism and media. And it's always challenging because also it's only now that journalists specifically are starting to have like open discussions about mental health and the trauma that journalists themselves actually go through, right? Especially people who do news and whatever, and things that they see and encounter. Nobody really talks about the impact that has on journalists. So one of the biggest jokes in the newsroom is that, like, oh, journalists are alcoholics, ha ha ha. But it's like, it's so much deeper than that. Like, it's, nobody drinks as much as they drink just for pleasure. Like, if you look at, just some of the very high substance abuse rates in the media industry, it's not pleasurable. It's a coping mechanism. And when I was on my second editorship, it was really rough. It was a really tough environment. It was a tough period. I was dealing with a lot of there were a lot of microaggressions, but then also just like nasty people, right? Who just were using you as a scapegoat for all sorts of things, also because you're a Black woman. And that was when I really was like, oh God, I really can't do this anymore. I remember when I realized I really needed help was when we moved to a new building and it had a really nice rooftop, but there's no there was no, what can I say? There were no barriers, right? It was just a rooftop. And I was just like, man, somebody's gonna throw themselves off that rooftop. And I'd make that joke all the time because I wasn't joking. I thought it was gonna be me. So like whenever I'd have to go outside, like on the third floor is where I worked, you're not gonna die from jumping on the third floor, but I'd be standing on the balcony and I'd think, yeah, it looks really attractive down there. I should just jump over. And then that's when I was like, you know what? I need to get help. And I told my bosses, I was like, look, I'm not in a good mental space. I really want to kill myself. I need a break. And I got a break. I was quite lucky also that I was given, I think, 2 weeks off. And then I got a psychiatrist that somebody else in the newsroom had referred me to, who has been a huge influence in my life. And I got on medication, and I've been very open about it because I think a lot of people go through it, but they don't talk about it. And I wasn't going to I'm not going to hide it because so many of us go through it. And I think there's nothing wrong with going through it. And there's nothing wrong with getting help, but you must get help if you can. If you look at the statistics of the country also, I mean, there were studies that have shown, for instance, that poverty exacerbates mental health issues, that 1 in every 3 South Africans actually might have some sort of mental health challenge that they're facing, and that, trauma is hereditary, it's genetic now, where it actually changes people's genes. So your parents or your grandparents' trauma actually does get passed down to you. So there's certain things that'll traumatize us. So even though we might not have lived through apartheid firsthand, that trauma is there. And it's not just because of the stories we've been told, but because it actually did change people's DNA and was passed down and we're born with this trauma. But nobody gets treatment for it. We don't talk about it. And for me, it's very important to be open about it. In terms of I don't care how it affects the way that people look at me. That's just the truth. I am on anti-anxiety medication. I'm on, they call them mood stabilizers now, right? They were antidepressants before. Now the new name is mood stabilizers. But I take meds and I'm quite open about it because why should it be stigmatized? And I'm trying to get help for something that I'm struggling to deal with on my own. There's nothing wrong with that.
More with Pearl as she breaks down Black empowerment and exploitation.
Learning the difference between Black empowerment and Black exploitation, because very often they're dressed in the same cloth. My career really climbed very quickly, incredibly quickly. So I joined, it was called a VUSA then, as an intern, and the internship program, it was a training program for a year, where you work in print, broadcast, and digital. And so you learn all of those different disciplines of journalism. You work in those different disciplines of journalism, and that's what I was doing. And my first job was at Times Live. They try to place all the interns in jobs. So they take 10 kids a year, which is amazing that we even made it, because they have hundreds of applications every year. And you have to write an essay to make it in, and then, to be shortlisted, then you do interviews, then you have a panel interview, and then you have a test. It's a lot. And then once you get there, they try to put you in different parts of the company to do different kinds of journalism, different disciplines, and then whoever wants you, but they always try to place you. So I ended up at Times Live, that's where I started, but I'd always wanted to be a features writer. And when I had to fill in a form and I was still joining, they asked you, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to be a features writer. That's all I wanted. I didn't care about anything else. I didn't care about politics. I didn't want any of that. And then after Times Live, I got a job at the newspaper, The Times, as a features writer, which was about a couple of months later, I think, but it was the same company, excuse me. So then I was a features writer there, and then while I was working as a features writer at the Times, which was so much fun because I was writing about gender and feminism and rape, and then fashion and design, it was just amazing. You know what I mean? The days were different. Yeah. So Mondays it was health, Tuesdays it was tech, Wednesdays it was lit. I had a good time working for a daily newspaper. And while I was there, I got offered a job still in the same company. They were starting a new website called Daily Planet, in Superman. And it was going to be a cheeky pop culture, socio-political website. And so they were like, oh, do you want to be the editor? I'd been working for 2 years at that point. And I was so nervous about doing it. And I spoke to my boss at the time, Jackie, and she said, yes, just give it a try. And that has been my attitude since also. That was a big influence in my life, just to give things a try. So I gave this job a go, and we did this. We had so much fun. But that website was way ahead of its time. It was way ahead of its time. We lasted for a year. Then the company decided they weren't interested in pursuing that website any further. And my boss at that place was a guy called Ben. And I remember when he offered me that job, I was like, oh, I didn't realize anyone was paying attention. And he said, someone's always watching. And I remembered that also, right? Somebody's always watching you. So even if you don't think anyone's watching you, someone's always watching. Another lesson that I've learned, and something I try to remind myself of all the time. And then I ended up at the Sunday Times. And then I became the lifestyle editor of Sunday Times, which was my second editorship. And at that point, that was 2017. So it was 6 years since I'd been an intern. It was crazy. Because the Sunday Times lifestyle used to be called Sunday Times Magazine back in the day when I was a kid, when I was reading Sunday Times. And that's where I wanted to work, for the Sunday Times Magazine. And so I ended up not only working there, but being the editor, which is something I'd never wanted. I'd never wanted to be an editor. I've never cared. I just wanted to write. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And when I was presented with opportunities and people who believed in me and saw something in me that I didn't see, I'm glad I decided to take those opportunities. And I'm very lucky that I was surrounded actually also by people who not only saw potential, but had the power and the influence to help me achieve that. Like, I don't ever take that for granted also, because yeah, there was hard work involved. Yes, I'm talented, but I'm also lucky. Like, that played a role, you know, and there was proximity to power that helped me get the jobs that I got. And I didn't get them necessarily because I'm the smartest person or like, you know, I'm better than everybody, because there's always somebody that's better than you. There's always somebody that's smarter than you. There's always somebody that's working harder than you. But other things are also at play that helped me to get that job, which yes, I deserved, but I also was very, very lucky. That's how my career has just sort of gone since, because I say yes to things and then opportunities present themselves. I think just being a Black woman for a long time was a big challenge, right? Yeah, that was it really, being a Black woman in many different ways, from the way that people view you, the way that people look at you, the way that people treat you, and the way that you treat yourself, and the conditioning that you have to overcome. You have to overcome being conditioned, for instance, to not be too expressive, being conditioned to keep your head down and just do the job and do whatever you're told. Because, you know, you can come from a family where you're taught the opposite, but the world is still the world. It'll always have an impact and an influence on who you become and how you act. So I had to overcome that mindset of, I'm not deserving. I mean, imposter syndrome, please. I still have it, but I've learned to manage it quite well. And I try to like kick it to the curb as much as possible, and it just keeps coming back. But I had to overcome that. And then you also have to overcome the other side of the coin, which is when being a Black woman is like desirable and popular. And now it's like, oh, you're in fashion, you know what I mean? And it's just like, and then you also have to fight that where you're like, oh my God, am I being paraded because I'm a Black woman? Professional spaces especially are the ones where you can't avoid those triggers. And I've learned some interesting lessons in the past few years, and my last couple of jobs, which is, for instance, learning the difference between Black empowerment and Black exploitation, because very often they're dressed in the same cloth, right? So people will pretend they're empowering you because, as a Black person and as a woman. So like previously, like let's say the past 2 years, I learned about finally seeing the difference also between those two and thinking more critically that just because you're Black in a position of power doesn't mean you have power. I learned that the hard way, but I also learned it very quickly, and that's one thing I like about myself. I learn lessons fairly quickly, and then this year also learning about the other side of the coin, or the other version of it, which is empowering women, but you're not actually doing that. You're just doing it for the look, once again, where you're just trying to make it look like you're empowering women when actually you're just using them. Those for me have been the triggers that just keep coming back, I think, through professional situations. And then a few years ago, when I got my second editorship, it changed my viewpoint, which was I realized that, the lifestyle space specifically, which is a very influential and lucrative space, actually, right, and a lucrative part of journalism, that we are so underrepresented as Black people in this country, which is really funny. Because when you look at our newspapers or our magazines, if it's poverty, corruption, crime, suffering, violence, the face is Black. But when it's lifestyle, which is like, where to hang out, what to eat, what to wear, what to think, what to read, we are very we're missing from those pages. And I was just like, actually, we deserve to be represented too. We should have Black people who are directors and who are, swimmers and surfers, or whoever that we actually get to write about, who have design brands that we can feature, that we can give attention to in this beautiful, soft, and very important lifestyle space. So then it changed. I changed when I got that job, I changed my perspective about my career after that. It became more about representation, and, giving us the space as Black people and as, queer people and gender non-conforming people, to give everybody the space and the representation that they deserve and the grace that they deserve in that representation without it being anthropological. So that's what inspires me to do what I do now and the way that I do it. It's just to tell other people's stories, and to just just let people express themselves on a bigger scale than they would be able to, and to reach a bigger audience than they'd be able to. That's what inspires me. Knowing that I can, I suppose, change or in a way alter the way that certain conversations around certain groups are told. The highlight of memory is being alive, bro. I don't take that for granted, because I didn't think I'd make it this far, to be honest. Just growing up as a kid, I was quite nihilistic and negative, and which is very weird, because in general I'm an optimist, right? And when my family was always going through tough times, I was always the one who's like, no, it's okay, things will get better, because I genuinely do believe things will get better. Like even now, that's what gets me going. No matter how rough life is, I always think the future is bright. However, my future looked like it was bright but short. I didn't expect myself to live past a certain age, just because I didn't know what was the point of living. I was just a very joyless person on the inside when I was younger. Very weird. But my highlights have been doing what I do, man. I'm doing exactly what I wanted to do since I was 9. That's wild to me. Not a lot of people, I think, can say that. And not a lot of people also know what they want to do. And I'm really lucky that I discovered very early on what I wanted to do, and that I found ways, but so did the universe and my ancestors. They also found ways to make things happen and to make my dreams come true. So my highlights have been, I think, being an editor has been a highlight, just because it's actually, it's wild. It's a lot of responsibility. It's something I never thought I would do, something I never wanted to do, but that actually turned out to be fairly good at. Starting projects. I'm really good at starting projects. Not so much maintaining them. So I just realized, when I joined Sunday Times Lifestyle, they were redesigning the whole product. So I was part of the redesign, which is almost like starting something new. And then when I joined, even with Daily Planet, right, that was a brand new website. So there was a blueprint that I was creating. And then with Careers Magazine was exactly the same thing. It was something just out of thin air. You're given, this is what we want, a magazine about youth careers, or a magazine for youth that's about careers, and then you have to come up with everything else. And I realized I'm actually really good at starting projects, at implementing things, at strategizing. It's weird, I've learned so much about myself. So those have been, I think, the highlights, starting big, scary projects, but doing it anyway. I don't know where it's going to end up, but I'm going to try it. Professionally. And then on a personal level, my highlights, there's so many. Yeah, I think being a mother, for sure. It's not the first thing that would jump out of my head, because there's so much more to me than that. But yeah, man, being a mom, I think about my kid a lot, because she's so cool. And I'm just like, I'm really lucky, actually. So now I'm like, okay, that's one of the things that helped me, that stopped me from killing myself a couple of years ago, actually, was that I have a kid. And I was like, you know what? I was really worried she would internalize it when she gets older. Where she'd be like, oh man, I wasn't enough for my mom. She killed herself. I was just worried about how that would affect her psyche in the future. So then I went to a psychiatrist to get help when I was at my lowest point, because I was like, I need to stay alive for this kid. And it's not even about feeding her, because she can be fed by her grandmother or her father, or whatever. It was just about how it'll impact her as a human being, as a girl, as a woman. She is dope. So she's one of my highlights. And just, I think having the people in my life that I have, I'm just the luckiest girl. I really am. I know so many incredible human beings. That is a really, really, really big highlight in my life. I'm so lucky. Just do what you want and be true to yourself. I think be kind to yourself. Just in general, as a human being, I think it's important that we're all kinder to ourselves. We hold ourselves to very harsh and unfair standards. And we're harder on ourselves than anybody else could be. The world is hard enough already. People will be rough on you already. You should not be part of that group of people that treats you badly. You know what I mean? We need to really just try to be kinder to ourselves, give ourselves room to grow and to change your mind. It's okay to change your mind. We like to stick to things too much, where it's well, this is me. I'll give you an example. I never wanted to get married or have kids, and it was genuinely, I did not want it. And everybody knew that. My whole family knew that. And then I changed my mind, and it's fine if you change your mind. If you change your mind about your career or where you want to live or whatever direction you want to take, that's cool. You should not feel ashamed. The only person you really have to make happy at the end of the day is you.
Join the conversation on our Facebook page @Thando Channel, and let us know what resonated